Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today is Sunday, August the 25th, 2024, which is the last Sunday in the month, and therefore it's the day for our monthly Global Town Hall, where Project Save the World invites people all over the world to come and talk about whatever's on their minds. And I see that Marilyn Krieger has just come to the door and is knocking, so I'd better let her in and let's get started, shall we?
As you know, I was in New Mexico, so that was very cool. So I'm figuring out what's new in California because I just got back a couple of days ago.
Okay, and it was an art show or what?
That was in Santa Fe, the annual Indian Art Show, which is a juried show, and also they sell things, and it's fantastic. The Santa Fe normally only has 90,000 people in there, who live there, but the show brings in an additional 100,000 this year.
Wonderful. Now I'm going to say hello to newcomers. Hello, Paul. How's everything?
Life has been incredibly complicated lately.
Yeah.
Well, and it's the same world we both live in that's developing strange tendencies.
Well, strange can be good or bad. It doesn't sound like you're enjoying it. Is that right?
So I have incredible ups and downs, but in the last couple of days, I felt down in the sense of, maybe the outlets for my action are not as great as I had hoped.
The outlets? Outlets for your action?
Yeah.
You mean the people who are trying to get your word out are not doing it?
Associated with the elections in the United States, there are deep-seated convictions on both sides which interfere with the process of dialogue. And let me just leave it at that for now.
Okay.
But that's
like something we should come back to, because that's an important observation. Yeah. How are you, Bill?
Yeah, well, I'm doing just fine. I've got
and your animal friends.
That's a little bit complicated in that lately, since June 23rd up to the present time, along the places where I have my trail cameras, there have been copper thieves, coming into the maintenance yard that is right along the backside of the Matadero Creek. And they have disrupted my whole research on the wildlife out there, because they stole 10 of my trail cameras, and I can't put the trail cameras back out there, otherwise they're going to be stolen. And I had some in security boxes, but these guys carry bolt cutters, and they just snapped the chain right in, with no problem at all, and took the cameras. So I'm dealing with that kind of a thing. I don't know if you know it, but the value of copper, I have been told, is more than an ounce of gold. An ounce of copper is worth more than an ounce of gold.
No, I certainly never heard such a thing. That's amazing.
Yeah, because absolutely everything that we have in this technological world requires some degree of copper. And so it's very, very valuable. And it's a nationwide problem. There are whole organizations devoted to stealing copper and selling it off on, I don't know where the market is, but it's out there.
Well, I have to say, I don't want to hijack this conversation before we even get started, but I wonder, I would love to know whether if we had records of different societies, how much variation is there in the amount of dishonesty and theft? Because every single day I get 3 or more attempts to steal from me, mostly by phone or internet. I don't, I don't, I don't think my physical environment is awfully risky, but I do know that the number of people who try to steal is so extraordinary now that people cannot trust, and without trust you can't have a proper society. And I wonder, historically, has there been that much dishonesty in previous times and periods, and even now in other locations?
Yeah,
I wish somebody could give me some, I'd love to see a scientific historical comparison of how much of different kinds of moral or personal problems or issues exist in different societies at different times. Because I think not only is there more theft going on, but there's more mental illness, I think. There are more people with,
Yes.
I
disturbed
agree.
or either personality, character problems, or disorders, mental brain damage and things.
Well, part of this group that is doing the copper theft. By the way, that's a great question, Meta. But these people apparently are smoking crack and doing probably other drugs as well. They put 4 of them in jail. 1 of them got out of jail and is right back doing the same thing he was arrested for.
Mhm. Well,
So,
with addiction, you're going to expect that, right? I mean, they can't help it. It's like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So what I'm saying is that complicates your question.
Yeah. I want to say hello to Andrei Kamenchikov, who is presumably in Kyiv, Ukraine, right? Hello, Andrei. Are you in
Yeah.
Kyiv?
Yes, I am.
Tell us the news of the world from the Kyiv perspective.
The war is continuing, as we all know, unfortunately. There is quite a bit of excitement here because of the Ukrainian incursion into Russia now. And so that has been dominating in the news for the last 3 weeks, I guess. That the Ukrainian forces today control a small part of Russian territory in the Kursk region, about, I don't know, maybe 1,000 square kilometers or a little more than that. And of course, that's very little compared to the parts of Ukraine that Russia are under Russian control. So today, what Ukraine controls in Russia in terms of territory is about 1% of what Russia controls in Ukraine. But the simple fact of that and the fact that Ukraine can carry out, at least at this point, a relatively successful offensive operation has been a very important moral boost here. There's obviously a change of basically for almost a year, the war was very slowly, but was moving in one direction, and Russia was chipping off with huge casualties very slowly, but was chipping off one after another piece of Ukrainian land territory, mainly in the Donbas region. And it just seemed that, this was a war of attrition, that Ukraine doesn't have any hope to win, just because of, the difference in resources. Can't really compare the resources, even though technically, of course, Ukraine doesn't rely on itself, it relies on foreign support. This latest event, for the first time in almost a year, gave people hope and was a sign that, things might not be that desperate in military terms. Now, this always has two sides to it, because obviously, you know, I'm not a military person, and I don't know what the true capacities, the military capacities of the two sides are. I do see that people, you know, the general tendency in Ukraine is to people feel more confident now that they can be more successful from a military point of view. What will that lead to? Who knows? A very important aspect of what has happened, it showed it had maybe 3 or 4 effects. One is this moral boost, number one, for Ukraine. Number two, it showed that despite the, let's say, frankly, not very wise, to say the least, Ukrainian information and, you know, wartime propaganda that was very indiscriminate in and is unfortunately still very indiscriminate in portraying the Russian population and almost entirely as supportive of Putin and entirely responsible for what has happened. Nonetheless, the behavior of the armed forces in the areas in Russia that they have under their control has been pretty much according to, you know, relatively high international standards. Of course, you know, no one's ideal, but I think that, you know, compared to the behavior that the Russian forces demonstrate in Ukraine, of course, Ukrainian forces are behaving much better, and that's very important. And Russian propaganda obviously is trying to, you know, accuse Ukraine of all kinds of crimes and, you know, just making up stuff, you know, totally without any base, you know, claiming that Russian people are being deported and taken to slavery in Ukraine and all kinds of ridiculous crap like that. You know, they just throwing in, you know, one thing. But there's really no substance to any of this. Now, that's number two. Number three, what it showed is that, you know, Russia really does not have anything in, you know, in its sleeve that it can pull out, of course, except for nuclear weapons. But what's interesting is there's much less talk about nuclear weapons now in Russia than there was previously, you know, because I think it's pretty clear that the Russian leadership is not ready to actually use that kind of those weapons in this war under practically any circumstances. And what's even more important is that so far, and it's very hard for me to judge because I'm in Kiev, but from what I see, there's no wave of you know, military enthusiasm, you know, in Russia, or, you know, this no wave of, you know, let's defend our motherland, you know, from the invaders, even though that's obviously the message that the government and the propaganda is trying to sell to the population. Now, that doesn't mean that some people that you know, will not be affected by this propaganda. And basically, what I'm afraid of is that this incursion might really help Putin in, you know, find more people willing to sign up for the military, you know, because in the country of Russia, of course, you know, there's lots of people that, you know, might have been thinking about that, considering that, and now that might be a factor that might help actually Putin in getting new people in the military ranks. But there's nothing like any you know, wave of patriotism in Russia, you know, based on it. So I would say that the state of the Russian society, the majority of people there are, you know, it's sort of like sand. People are complacent, but they're not enthusiastic, you know. Basically, you know, they're used to this formula that we don't interfere in politics and the government shouldn't interfere in our daily lives very much. And, you know, that was the system that worked for many years and helped Putin, you know, become the dictator that he is today. But now, when he needs public support. He doesn't get much of it. So that's something to consider. So that's the overall picture. I think both sides are. I don't think anything major will happen till the presidential elections in the U.S. Both sides are waiting for that, and of course, both worrying and anticipating something. And basically, I think that we won't see major. Maybe we might see some developments, on the front lines, some military developments, but I don't see any major political change till it's clear, who's in charge in the White House.
Mhm.
So,
Okay, one of the
that's an
things that
overview.
occurs to me as I read different analysts in the Western press is that there's no sense of enthusiasm or excitement or optimism here, or very little, about the prospects of having Ukraine really be successful as in terms of how much the benefits and the losses that are incurred by this invasion of Russia, because you're going to lose that more territory that you were on the verge of losing anyway, but it'll be easier for the Russians to take over more territory because the Ukrainian armed forces have been shifted around enough to send some people into the Kursk area, and that means that they can't defend it. So
I don't, I'm not a military analyst, but I would be very careful. You don't have, from what I know, the figures of the Ukrainian forces that participate in this offensive are probably, different estimates, maybe 10, 15,000. That's not a large chunk of the Ukrainian military today. And if you look at, and it's clear that the Russian military was caught, with their pants down. They weren't prepared. And it's, I think, clear that, at least in manpower, the Russian losses so far have been much, much greater than the Ukrainian losses in this incursion. So this is something, and the Ukrainian was able to gather the initiative in this particular area. So, and Russia is now, to block the Ukrainian advance, Russia will need to probably pull in significantly more forces than Ukraine has committed to this operation. So if you look at the, from a very cynical military point, at the cost and balances, that might be a much more effective deployment of the fairly limited troops that were involved than, just trying to stem Russians' advances, Russia's slow advances in the Donbass. Also, what happened is the Russian military that's being now sent to the Kursk region. What Russia is doing is, so far as I understand, they're not moving any forces from their key, the areas where they're continuing their offensive, which is maybe wise from a military point of view because they don't want to lose the momentum that they have in the Donbass. But it's, on the other hand, what they're sending in is really often very poorly prepared forces, poorly trained, not well coordinated. Many don't have combat experiences and so forth. And as a result, they're losing, that's why their losses are so significant. A few things. Number one, I know that the most important and decisive factor is not purely military in these wars. It's basically the societal factor. It's the mobilization, the motivation, the state to which one or another society is ready to mobilize for its goals in a war or a violent conflict. Two, this state is determined primarily not by any expectations of relate to a potential victory, but by the fear of defeat, the way people perceive the cost of defeat in their of their side in the war.
Mhm.
And to what that leads to, and what it says is one of the best ways you can, one of the best tools you can use to increase your chances in a violent confrontation or a war is by trying to actually to decrease the perception of the cost of defeat on the other side. Now that takes some thinking and that takes some clever strategy, and that to do that, both the leadership and in the best case, the society in general needs to use the number one weapon, and that weapon is a human mind.
Ryan, turn on your camera and say hello, because I want to ask you what you're up to.
No interest in hiding, but the time zones are such that if you
Yeah.
want to accommodate 3 continents, then you need to be 2 or 3
What
hours
time is
later.
it there now for you?
4 in the morning.
Poor dear. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm happy to hear the conversation.
Okay.
We have great solidarity with Ukraine and the effort to fight for freedom and democracy and the free world. So our thoughts and hearts are with all Ukrainians to defend their homeland.
I'm not sure that's true of everybody, but because there's a significant proportion of peace activists who look at things quite differently. And for example, I want to ask Andre this. A dear friend of mine who's a Croatian, she's a Serb who became a refugee to Canada during the war in Yugoslavia. And as a Serb, the Serbs think of Russians as their brothers. There's a strong relationship between Serbs and Russians, I think. And when I talk about the war with her, her perspective is she's a little guarded. She doesn't want to hurt my feelings by disagreeing, but clearly we don't have the same perspective. And she says, we listen to both sides. We listen to the news from Russia and from the Western journalists. And then we try to figure that the truth is probably halfway in between. And I said, no, my impression is, even though, Western journalists are no paragons of anything in particular, that there's probably more truth in what the Western journalists report than what you would be getting if you listen to Russia. And of course, Andre is a Russian living in Ukraine. So I expect you look at both sides of the news war, the media, and tell me, is she right? I said, I don't think that if you just split the difference, if you just try to figure that the truth is about halfway in between, I don't think you're going to get very far that way. I think the truth is more what Western journalists are reporting. But you can tell me more than my guess is worth, Andre.
Yeah, well, of course, official Russian sources, that's not journalism, that's propaganda. It's wartime propaganda. And Russia is a modern 21st century fascist state. It meets all the classical criteria of fascism. I wouldn't compare it maybe to Nazi Germany. I think fascism is a much wider, I think there is a difference actually between Nazism and fascism, but if you compare Russia like to countries like Spain under Franco or Italy under Mussolini, it's very, very similar. And so it's obviously the media in Russia in that sense is no source of information at all, official media. But you do have very many independent Russian language media sources, in the internet especially, that are trying to give, objective picture. So if you want to listen to Russian media, then why not listen to them?
If she listens to what I think she's listening to, which would be, Russian TV, or the accepted Russian outlets for newspapers and so on, I think she's not getting quite the straight story, but I don't know whether Western media are that much more honest and truthful than what she's getting. And I can't answer her except to say, I don't think that you can just split the difference and say the truth is halfway between. Yeah.
No. It's very different. Western media might be somewhat biased, might be, a bit one-sided in some cases, but of course, Western media, you have very different sources and, you have different influences. It can be biased in different directions. But official Russian media is not media at all. It's wartime fascist propaganda based. It's a whole different, it shouldn't be seen as one in the same category. You can't compare a runner with a gymnast. It's different types of sports totally. So they call themselves media, but they're not.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass this on to her for what it's worth. Yeah, I want to get back to Brian. Brian is a scientist working on climatology, and particularly he's interested in oceanography and kelp and seaweeds and that sort of thing, and the importance of the plankton and other life forms in the ocean, the impact of that on global warming. So we've had him on our regular, every week we have at least one show now about almost entirely about global warming and the different technological solutions that are being put forward as ways of mitigating or reversing the effects of global warming. Brian, we have you scheduled for something coming up in the future at a time when I know you don't like to get up in the middle of the night. So I'll have to check with you. But there's another thing that's interesting to me that we're trying to organize. And that is a series of at least 2 forums about a new technological proposal that wasn't on my agenda a year ago when I planned this series of talks. And that is about a plan to stop or slow anyway the disintegration of the ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica. Both of them, of course, are covered by very, very thick sheets of ice. And that if I'm telling the story the way I've heard it, both of them are slipping and sliding off into the ocean. There's some of the parts are sliding off, which will raise the sea level, could be 10 feet or something, if it depends. And that this is mostly because under the ice is water. I don't know why there'd be water between the ice and the rocks. But of course, Greenland and Antarctica are both rocky soil. And if we could suck the water out and pump it up and put it on top so it refreeze, then the ice wouldn't be able to slip. It'd be snagged on the rocks and held in place. Whereas as it looks like now, a lot of it's going to slip off into the ocean. Can you comment on that?
Yes, 20 years ago, I worked with the late Connie Stephan in Greenland and actually observed the galloping glacier of Ilulissat and its procession into the sea at a rate 100 times faster than was normal at the time. He and Brian Box have done a great job of documenting the sliding of the glaciers into the sea. The water is a symptom rather than a cause. There is a deluge of water, which is denser than ice, so it sinks down in 40 minutes, you can empty an entire glacial lake into the terrestrial bed, and it hydraulically lifts the glacier off of the rocks, and which point the only thing holding the glacier in is the tensile strength of the ice, and ice is not very strong in tension. So we've measured magnitude 5 earthquakes as far away as Caltech due to these ice quakes that occur when the ice is cutting loose and going into the sea. So it is a serious concern. And by the way, it's 28 feet for Greenland and 200 feet for Antarctica, should we not manage to keep these ice caps. So, the next meter of sea level rise you'll lose half the rice in Vietnam. So food security across the world is critical. Many nations would be going underwater. Half of Florida would be underwater. This is a serious concern. Our solution is at rebrighten.org, and that is all about rebrightening ocean planet Earth. And what I mean by rebrightening is our planet today is dimmer and duller than it was just 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we had more marine clouds and more sea ice that reflected sunlight back into space. And the NASA Ceres satellite.
Okay, it sounds like you believe in this proposal, right? I've got 2 different shows lined up in which we're going to be talking about that. And in fact, if we don't need to do
And
this
how to
here.
rebrighten.
No, I'm talking about the pumping of water from under the ice, just pumping it up, and apparently if you put it on top of the ice, that's going to refreeze it. But it's water underneath, and that's what allows it to slip.
Yes, I understand what your point is there. My point is that is a symptom rather than a cause. When you get warming, you will have melting. You will have a deluge of melting. Millions of cubic meters of water can be, forming and sinking down, and you're not going to stop that from happening unless you keep the ice cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend doing what nature does, and that is more marine clouds will actually contribute to reflecting more sunlight and keeping the ice cool in the spring and the summer and the autumn.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that naturally, it turns out the limiting factor for most of this in the ocean is cloud condensation nuclei. And it turns out algae have a pivotal role to play when it comes to cloud condensation nuclei. In particular, algae, including microalgae and kelp forests, are responsible for biogenic aerosols, natural aerosols, that form the nuclei for marine stratocumulus clouds to form. And that's what keeps Canada cool in the summer. That's what keeps Greenland cool in the summer. And so the challenge and the opportunity is to rebrighten our planet one locale and one region at a time, and do it ideally with nature-based solutions like algae, including macroalgae, seaweed, kelp beds, and including microalgae where and when those are available. The nice thing about macroalgae seaweed is you can hold on to it. So you can put a hectare where you need to actually produce those biogenic aerosols that will keep our coastlines cool.
Well, we
I should
talked
make
a lot about that, and I want to talk further about it. Yeah, Paul, speak.
Yeah, I didn't know that there was a plan to massively put microalgae in the atmosphere, but I have to say it has certain obvious advantages over the sulfur particle things which other people talk about. Because
Agreed.
what worries me the most about the sulfur particle geoengineering is the fact that once that sulfur starts going into the ocean, it contributes to all kinds of scary things.
Yeah.
But algae would sound like a possible safer alternative, an answer to the people who want to put the sulfur particles up there. Maybe. I don't know, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that very much. First of all, we have to, since you brought up geoengineering, that is the global or large-scale intervention to modify the climate. Our efforts begin at the local and regional scale, and thus, by definition, are not geoengineering. we're focusing on helping communities get their healthy climate back. And that's one locale and one region at a time. Now, ultimately, once communities do adopt this and it's shown to work, then people will eventually come to realize that rebrightening our planet is going to be absolutely essential to ensure that humanity can live with the rest of nature in a steady and sustainable equilibrium.
Yeah,
Now,
and let me emphasize,
Mm.
one of the problems we have with all of these policy issues is we can get distracted by semantics. So when I use the word geoengineering, I'm not intending that to mischaracterize or distort what you're doing. It's not at all. It's more like a way of organizing an incredibly complex body of knowledge. And the second point I would want to make is when we talk about preventing heating where we don't want it, I strongly agree with the idea of let's focus particularly on reducing the heating in areas like the Antarctic and the Gulf Stream, the source of the Gulf Stream, because it turns out it is the heating in those areas which is most crucial to what I see as the main global problems. Meta knows we've written things about the role of ocean currents, and the Antarctic and the North Atlantic are the sources of the currents which I regard as most critical to human survival. Anyway.
Well, I agree with you. And our challenge and our opportunity are to build community projects that are non-controversial enough to be funded and to be fundable, because we're more than just talk. We're boots on the ground, we're fins in the water, and we're about actually getting these projects demonstrated at a small community scale.
I want to go back one step backward, though, because I believe there's a clarification. I think Paul understood Brian to be saying that he would put plankton in the atmosphere. My understanding is your intention is to put microalgae or any kind of algae in larger numbers in the ocean to farm it and to build up the amount of plankton, and that produces some chemical called D. It starts with a D. It's an acronym I can't remember, but that then produces stuff that whitens the clouds. But it is not that you're going to spray the algae into the atmosphere itself. Am I correct?
That is correct, Meta. Overall, we work with macroalgae seaweed and not microalgae plankton, because you can hold on to it. You can keep it in one place and you can grow it easily. And we've now got a half acre of beautiful seaweed growing in the Western Pacific, and it works wonderfully. It actually is providing food security for humanity and 8 million species that can't vote. It's actually generating those natural biogenic aerosols that help to keep the Philippines cool, and that is with nice clouds and rain and all the rest. And it's actually helping to fix carbon at amazing amounts per hectare. We're just astonished at, you give nature half a chance and she'll rebound exponentially. But we're addressing a fundamental nutrient value chain gap that's caused by global warming, and that is ocean warming leads to decreased nutrients in the surface waters, and that's decreased primary production, which means decreased food and habitat for fishes and marine life and for humanity. So we're about regenerating seaweed forests, regenerating sardine populations, and getting our food security back on track for a climate resilient future, while at the same time learning about how nature cools the planet through biogenic aerosols.
Good summary.
I wanted to clarify. So if I understand right, there's some sort of algae that you basically like put fertilizer in the ocean that helps it grow, and then how does that brighten the atmosphere? Does that just increase the evaporation, or I'm just a little confused.
So I'll give you the causal chain. First of all, we don't add any fertilizer to the ocean, but when we have a seaweed platform, we call it a deep cycling marine permaculture platform, that at sunset, we lower at night down 100 meters, and that's where the nutrients are down deep. And the seaweed acts like a sponge and soaks up nitrate, phosphate, and other micronutrients that are in the seawater down deep.
At sunrise, we lift the platform up to the surface for it to soak up sunlight and carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea. And it's the combination of deep nutrients and surface carbon dioxide that can sequester, that can actually fix thousands of tons of carbon per year per hectare, potentially. And at least hundreds, I would say. And then furthermore, that seaweed goes to produce food, feed, and fertilizer products. It also provides habitat for sardines, anchovies, and small herbivorous fishes, which are the base of the food pyramid, the food chain. And then furthermore, that seaweed, when it senesces, releases the gases that produce biogenic aerosols. Between North America and Australia alone, we've lost 1/3 of a million hectares of kelp forest and other seaweed forests in the past century alone. And so our first challenge is to regenerate the 1/3 of a million hectares of lost kelp forest that we've lost in the past century to farming, siltation, runoff, and global warming. So our challenge is, let's get back to where we were pre-industrially when it comes to seaweed forests, and when it comes to the kind of natural biogenic aerosols that existed back in the 1800s. So we can get back to where we were. Give nature half a chance, she'll rebound exponentially. And the challenge and the opportunity here is to get back to those natural processes that kept our planet cool. I mean, we can talk about this as an Earth system, as Gaia, but this is the living system that keeps our planet cool, and it's done with those marine clouds that, if if it's cloudy or rainy, it's 20 degrees cooler than it is on a sunny day. And that's exactly what nature is doing, is cooling us off a little bit. So let's get back to nature, re-brighten the planet, physically, intellectually, and morally. Thank you.
Brian, I have a question.
Mhm.
I like this model, okay, and but how many of these units, rising and lowering, are we going to need in order to bring this whole global warming under some kind of control?
Well, let's start locally with community scale. But if you look at the ocean, this marine permaculture approach opens up and makes accessible 10 billion hectares of mostly empty ocean in the subtropics of the Pacific alone. So this is bigger than all of farming. Like, you look at the ocean, it's a big blue marble. And these big blue regions of subtropical ocean and, quite frankly, seasonally temperate waters as far north as the Hudson Bay, this is an approach that can scale beautifully. It's just 1 unit per hectare, but using less than 1% of one ocean, we can feed the world, provide enough food not only for humanity, but for 8 million species that can't vote, and actually fix, over time, at least a gigaton of carbon to get nature's biological pump back working again, even in an ocean warming world.
A year ago, I thought you were telling us a slightly different approach. When I first looked at a picture of this platform that you run and in the ocean where you're growing seaweed on this attached to the platform, the game plan involved having some kind of pump that would circulate the water, bringing up the deeper water, which contains all the nutrients, and pumping it up somehow. I don't know how you were going to do that, but at any rate, it was pumped. Now you're actually planning to, or maybe doing, lowering the whole platform into the deeper parts of the ocean at night. I don't know when that change took place, but one of the things Paul Werbos is concerned about, and I know you are too, so let's talk about it a little bit, is the fact that the ocean is stratifying more. But with global warming, the top layers of water become warmer and a very different temperature from the lower levels, and that this itself is a major problem. So one of the questions is, what can be done to circulate the water so it doesn't, to counteract this tendency towards stratification of water? One of the things that interests me is is the role of whales, but that's a side conversation. But please explain why you gave up the idea of pumps and switched to the idea of lowering your platforms into the depths every night.
Well, we haven't given up on it, but I think it's worth noting, first of all, we use marine solar power, but it takes about 100 times, 2 orders of magnitude more power to bring the mountain to Mohammed than to bring Mohammed to the mountain. So in this case, the mountain is 1 million cubic meters of seawater per day. You can imagine how much energy that takes to pump. And so there are times and places where upwelling makes sense, but it'll take a little time to get the reactionary portion of the marine ecology establishment on board with the idea of upwelling, whereas there's little controversy associated with deep cycling today. And that's because, we're not bringing water up that has has some carbon. We think that more carbon is being fixed than is being brought up. And so we'll get there eventually. And there are times like on the Great Barrier Reef, and also when it comes to restoring kelp forests that were near shore, you probably do need to do some upwelling. So that's maybe 10% of the time one might consider that approach. However, we can move forward today with deep cycling in a way that uses 100 times less energy, gets the job done, grows the food, and actually provides the biogenic aerosols that are needed to rebrighten our future.
Okay, how do you lower and raise this platform? Sounds to me like it's pretty hard work.
We have a series of marine solar powered buoys. We call them sea tractors, and they basically lower at night and raise during the day. And they're traction buoys that pull everything on a rope and enable it to work. So we have that running today in the Philippines, and we're looking forward to providing sea tractors to every marine farmer that wants to go out there and harvest a hectare.
Okay. Now here, Peter Wadhams has just joined us. I wish you'd been here a few minutes earlier, Peter, because you're the right person to consult in this connection. We have Brian Van Hertzen from Australia on the line, and Paul Werbos. And we've been talking, I started this by mentioning the topic of a show that I'm trying to organize now, actually 2 shows, 2 forums. Both of them on the topic of a proposal to pump water from the bottom of the ice sheet in the ice sheets, the one in Greenland and the one in Antarctica, pump the water that's at the bottom so as to make the ice snag on the rocks below and not slide off so easily. And Brian is saying that's not the way to go, that you should be doing marine cloud brightening or he's rebrightening of the oceans with the same marine cloud that we've been talking about. Now, you yourself are the world's leading expert on Arctic sea ice. And I would like for you to, Peter, I wish you'd been here to join in this conversation up to for the last 20 minutes. But tell me, first of all, what you think of this proposal. My original suggestion is the topic I want to do the new forums on, about pumping the water up from the underside of the ice sheets, and then compare that to Brian is not visible here, but he will be. He puts his picture up every now and then. Brian's proposal to use cloud brightening as a cure for this, the fact that the ice sheets are melting. Tell us your opinion about these alternative. They don't need to be alternative because we could do them both, but there are at least 2 different proposed solutions to the melting of the ice sheets at the poles. Peter.
Well, I've always been a fan of marine cloud brightening because of the very clear way in which there's that it's possible to actually get in the right going in the right direction, and it's relatively harmless as well. So always sort of gone for that. And anything else, I tend to look a bit suspiciously on. So I think I would tend to be a bit suspicious of this this other technique. Well, I'm not familiar with it, so I need to look at it.
Mm-hmm. There was a big article in, I think it was The Atlantic, a few months ago, which I could share to everyone. It's a very long article written by a journalist who went around with the scientists who are trying to do this. And I've got one show lined up with two people who are not themselves climatologists at all, but who are very eminent people trying to work up enthusiasm for this pumping of water idea. And this is a guy named Vint Cerf, who, as I understand it, if anybody can be called the father of AI, he would be one of them.
Of the internet, not of AI,
Well,
of the
yeah.
internet. There
Beg
is
your
a
pardon.
big difference.
Yeah, Paul is going to be on that show with him. As a matter of fact, Peter, maybe you should be too, or maybe I did invite you. I'm not sure, but if I haven't, I should. So he's one of them, and the other guy is Robert Axelrod, who's a political scientist. Both of them, Axelrod anyway, is retired, but he's a very famous game theorist. Wrote a book called The Evolution of Cooperation, which I used 25 years ago teaching in my courses on peace and conflict studies. Anyway, Brian, nice to see a real photo of you with, I think you can actually move now, can't you? And I can see you. If you smile, yes, I think you're moving.
3:05 in the morning, so I decided to actually get ready for the day. And good to see you, Peter. It's great to have you with us. Yes, and Meta and everyone else, Paul. So very, very happy, and I agree with Peter that this is, rebrightening our marine clouds will be essential to protecting our ice and protecting the brightness of our planet in the longer term. And we have to recognize that our planet is dimmer and duller than it was just 20 years ago. It's important when looking at these various interventions to look at the cost and look at the at the challenges. And I have spent some time on the ice, and I just know how difficult it would be to try to address what is a deluge of melting ice, melting water. And that melt, it's amazing how quickly it will find cracks in the ice, and it will sink down to the bottom, and it will hydraulically lift the ice off the rocks and cause them to slide into the sea 100 times faster than normal. So we've got to keep them cool, and that means cloudy summers and clear winters. And that's what we need to do up in the high latitudes and also in the subtropics.
But for the ocean currents, which Peter Ward and Lee Kump know about, we have to worry not only about the oxygen level, which is the stratification in the ocean, but we also have to worry about the nutrients at the source of the Humboldt and Gulf Stream current. If nutrients could be removed specifically from the deep ocean at the source of the Humboldt and Gulf Stream current, that could be so important. I would be willing to work with the people who would overcome any funding barriers. There should not be funding barriers, because for humanity, it's a critical investment. If you can pull the fertilizer from the source of the Gulf Stream and the Humboldt current, from that deep water, that is a really important opportunity we should not lose, if that's real.
Brian.
Paul is right about the eutrophication of parts of the ocean, like the Mississippi Delta and some other regions like the Amazon and Orinoco rivers. That those nutrients flowing down those rivers and into the sea represent a big problem and a big dead zone, for example, for the Gulf of Mexico. However, it's important to recognize that while 1% of the ocean is eutrophying, there's some 50 or 90% of the ocean that is actually oligotrophic, becoming oligotrophic. And that's a very long word for not enough nutrients. And that's part of the side effect of stratification. Meta, you brought up the point that stratification of the surface ocean is a serious problem. And it is. That's what contributed, that process contributed to the Permian mass extinction 250 million years ago. that wiped out 96% of all marine species in the ocean. Very serious business. So how do we address that? Well, we need to have enough nutrients that normally come from the deeper part of the ocean. And I agree with Paul. We need to monitor and understand those ocean currents very well. But just like, restoring circulation is good for your legs and your body, restoring circulation in the ocean is going to be important. And that is between the top 100 meters where most of life is living to the mesopelagic zone that's between 100 and 1,000 meters deep, that has centuries, if not millennia, of nutrients available, and this is a natural cycle. And so, in an ocean warming world, we're going to have to, help restore that natural upwelling that occurred in previous centuries, and we can do that either with the upwelling that we've talked about, which we've done some trials on over the past decade, and more importantly, the deep cycling is something we can go forward with today because it's working for seaweed, it's economic, and it's non-controversial enough to be.
When you say deep cycling, is that what you're talking about, where you're lowering your platform or something else?
At night. Yeah, we lower the platform at night, it goes down deep, and at sunrise, it gets cycled back up to the surface where those seaweeds absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea. It's this combination of deep nutrients and surface carbon dioxide that results in net carbon fixation and food production for all inhabitants of ocean planet Earth.
What kind of energy do you use to lower and raise that platform?
Marine solar, a few square meters of marine solar powered buoys, and we can raise and lower once a day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the sea tractors come in.
Mm-hmm. All right, I approve. Paul, do you approve?
Well, it's clearly a complicated subject, and we'll have to deal with it later.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to follow up, Paul. We're enthusiastic about getting the word out and very happy to go through any analysis or concerns and work through those together.
I'm not ready to quite let go of this because there's another element of it that I think I don't want to omit. And since Paul is here, he can correct me if I'm misstating his opinion. But I remember early on, Paul, when we had a conversation about the stratification of the ocean and the fact that that was indeed part of the explanation for the Permian extinction, the one that killed out practically all life forms on Earth, plant and animal. Large proportion, almost, it was a real extinction, big deal. And that the fuller explanation for that is not just that there's a difference in temperature of the surface and the deeper water, but that the bottom of the ocean became devoid or almost devoid of oxygen, and that there are certain life forms that live there, archaea or something like that, that live there, that produce hydrogen sulfide, and that is what we call swamp gas, which is an extremely poisonous gas, and that when this happens, large amounts of hydrogen sulfide can be emitted into the atmosphere, which kills everything within reach. So, if I'm not mistaken, that is part of your reason for being concerned about the stratification of the ocean. Have I garbled your thoughts, or please straighten me out if I have.
Well, one thing I should have mentioned, Peter Wadhams and Peter Ward both know incredible things. I'm grateful to both of them for engaging in a very deep dialogue where I gradually learned how these pieces fit. There's a paper by Ward, Wadhams, and Werbos, www, at the website buildaworld.org in the climate block. It's only about 3 pages. It summarizes what you said, but also another aspect. There was a time when Peter Ward's book, Under a Green Sky, was the #1 source of information on what really called the mass death at Permian Triassic. Peter Ward is the acknowledged expert. But as I worked with him, I learned that Peter has a more recent book by Ward and Kirschvink, which just goes into much more detail.
Peter Ward has it, not Peter Wadhams, right?
Well, and not me either. So Ward and Kirschvink is a book I cite many times, and there's a key chapter where he cites the work of a guy named Lee Kump. And as I was hearing these people, we've really got to find a way to get Lee Kump involved, because he is the one who, in my opinion, really nailed the causation here. It's low oxygen at the source of these currents and high fertilization. And if you put together the fertilization of the deep ocean with the low oxygen at the sources of these currents, it's that combination which kills everybody. If you can get rid of the fertilizer element, that doesn't solve the oxygen problem, but it's a really big part of it. There's stories of where only 90% of the land animals died, and we hardly notice it because they didn't have the fertilizer, but they did have the oxygen problem. And that affects the history of the human species. But the bottom line is getting rid of the fertilizer could preserve life if there is a new technology that can pull up the fertilizer from the deep ocean at these two specific points, cold places as it happens, the source of the Gulf Stream and the source of the Humboldt Current. That would go a long way to reducing the risk of another mass extinction. We might only lose 90% of the world's population, but what's that compared to 100?
Brian.
Yes, well, I think Paul's right in wanting to be focused on deep oxygen. That's very important. It's also important to understand that because of ocean warming, we've seen 30 to 40% less marine snow, and that is the plankton that sinks down and feeds those benthic communities at the bottom of the ocean, than we had just 60 years ago or 100 years ago. And so the Pacific, particularly the major portions of the subtropical Pacific, have seen a decrease in productivity, which means a decrease of plankton and a decrease of marine snow to those pelagic, those benthic communities on the seafloor. So they're getting less food than they got before. So there's fewer of them. So actually there's a problem of not enough food and not enough food supply for those benthic communities, and they've diminished somewhat. Now, Paul's right in wanting to focus about oxygen. We need to look at the sources of deep oxygen, and that includes Antarctica and the Newfoundland North Atlantic deep water that gets formed. Each one of those. Sorry? Yeah, up around. Yeah, those are all part of the same Atlantic deep water formation. What happens today is that during the cold winters in Antarctica and in the North Atlantic, you form very cold and saline water that is charged with oxygen. And it's the coldest, densest water on the planet. It sinks all the way down to the deep ocean, and it provides a huge amount of oxygen each year to the deep ocean. What is most concerning is that with more stratification and a warming Arctic and a warming Antarctic, that formation of deep water each winter is diminishing. And that is a very deep concern, because if we lose or diminish our supply of deep oxygen, then yes, sulfur and methane end up becoming more and more of a problem in the deep ocean if we don't have sufficient oxygen. So it's all about maintaining the oxygen supply for the deep ocean that will keep our ocean well oxygenated and healthy and alive for decades to come. So I would focus more on that supply of oxygen. Again, it's related to ocean stratification. But in this case, as I'm sure Peter Wadhams can attest, it's that deep water formation that occurs each winter off of Greenland and off of Svalbard and off of Antarctica especially, that is responsible for that deep oxygen supply. It's been decreasing a bit in the last year or two. So we're concerned about that continued oxygen supply. And it's all about healthy overturning circulation in the oceans.
Yeah, and we agree that the oxygen in the source of the deep currents is the number one variable. Although, and as I say, you'd only lose 90% of the life on Earth if that goes south. But, those of us who are part of the 90%, the oxygen is the number one trigger. But the increase in fertilization in just those places turns out to be the other key factor. But you really want to hit both factors. If the human race doesn't address both variables, for God's sake, we're committing suicide.
Well, I agree with the concern, Paul, and we do need to pay attention to those regions that are being eutrophied, and that's where there's too many nutrients near the surface. That's the mouth of the Mississippi River, the dead zone that extends across the Gulf of Mexico, and in fact, the mouth of the Amazon and Orinoco rivers, which are contributing to all that sargassum ending up on the beaches because they've been cutting trees. And as the natural tropical forest diminishes, all those nutrients flow down the river and go out into the ocean. So it's a huge spike of nutrients. And that applies to a few percent of the ocean. Now, just for a matter of perspective, the ocean has huge amounts of nitrate and phosphate in the deep ocean. Talk about a mountain. There's about 5 times as much phosphate dissolved in middle and deep seawater than all the mineral reserves of phosphate that we know of on the planet. All right, so we're not going to move that mountain anytime soon. But what we can do is ensure we have plenty of oxygen in the deep. If we can rebrighten our planet, we can keep those poles cool with ice in the wintertime, and that will contribute to that deep formation that will keep our deep ocean oxygenated and keep for healthy benthic communities throughout the ocean. So it'll be well oxygenated. We won't have a hydrogen sulfide problem, and we won't have a methane problem if we can keep our polar regions cool. Thank you.
I got a question. Can I?
Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like what I'm hearing here. It's the first really concrete positive that I've heard in a long time. And I've been keeping up with the progress of global warming since about 2005. Anyway, your solutions look so gargantuan, so monstrously huge, that my question is, do we as human beings have the capacity to do all of what you suggest?
That is a great question, Bill. That's one reason we're starting at community level, because a hectare of seaweed cultivation, an offshore community, can help to restore their ecology in the ocean and their economy with fishing and seaweed harvest and make a tangible difference. Now, we've actually charted out what will it take to get to scale. And if we can triple the area under deep water irrigation each year for the next dozen years, we will reach a gigaton of carbon fixation around 2035. Now, that's a gradual process, and we'll have to enlist capital to do this. But this is one of the reasons that our marine permaculture.
Excuse me, but how many gigatons do we need by 2035?
Well, I'm going to put it this way. It's my job, and it's on my bucket list to create one climate stabilization wedge, and that is defined by Sokolow at Princeton to be a gigaton of carbon per year. And so if we can fix a gigaton of carbon, I will check that off my bucket list. I will die a happy man. And you and everyone else can figure out how many gigatons can we do sustainably. I just want to get to 1 gigaton. Let's start there. And then let's figure out together how many we can do together.
Okay. Okay.
I might just like to introduce a note of caution, which is that we're talking all the time about the sources and sinks of water, but really the ocean is circulating all the time. So there isn't an absolute place where sort of water gushes forth and another place where it doesn't, it sinks. It's circulating, and we have to consider the level of the circulation, how much of that is how much energy is going into that as opposed to the rest of the circulation as such. So caution's needed. Yeah,
that is a great point, Peter. And I think along those lines, we should recognize that this ocean circulation and the atmosphere, it's a giant heat engine, and it relies on a temperature difference. And that is the temperature difference between the tropics and the poles determines that circulation energy. And so if, as you know, today, the poles, the Arctic regions are warming 4 times faster than the tropics. And so if on our business as usual, that heat engine's energy source is diminishing. And that's going to have a major effect on ocean circulation and atmospheric circulation as we go forward. So our challenge and our opportunity is to keep our Arctic regions cool and the Antarctic, keep our polar regions cool, keep that temperature difference there. And that will drive the ocean circulation that Peter is very aptly discussing. We need to maintain good circulations needed for your legs, and it's needed for your, for our bodies, and it's needed for our planet. And we need to maintain that ocean circulation. I heartily agree.
Okay. Yes, Peter, I wanted to cut you off. Peter Wadhams, go. You have something more you want to pursue on this?
One moment.
Okay. Well, we have covered a topic that I didn't expect we would get into today, but I find it very, very useful and so important. It's so important. And I'm so glad that we got it into a Global Town Hall, not for the first time, but in greater amount than usual, so that people who don't normally get into this subject matter will have a chance to get somewhat informed about it. And I think it was a good conversation, so I thank all of you for that. And let's see what we can do to greet my friend Alexei Prokorenko, who came in and must have been wondering, what the hell are we talking about for the last half an hour. Alexei is a Russian escapee who escaped Russian mobilization 2 years ago, I guess, and has been living in Warsaw. So hello, Alexei, how's everything?
Hello. Hello. Nice to see you all. Nice to see you, Meta. Thank you for having me here. And it's going pretty optimistic on my side again. First of all, it's been very, very exciting to hear something about temperatures, currents, and global warming, because I'm really concerned about that, more than a typical person with my passport would be.
Why?
Because I hear many friends and colleagues, even those well-read, those thinking, those intelligent, say that the global warming will be very conducive to Russia's prosperity, and specifically to the prosperity of its agriculture. That it will be beneficial for the warmer Siberia, for agriculture in Siberia, because what we now have is risky agriculture, as we call it, risky agricultural climate, and they hope that once it gets warmer, it ceases to be risky. It will be more like I guess, I don't know, Italy, France, or something.
I must have mentioned that there was an article, a very long article in the New York Times, I think it was the New York Times Magazine, may have been close to a year ago, that made that very argument, completely oblivious to the fact that they were saying, oh, the permafrost is melting, goody goody, Russia can grow more crops there. Yeah, if you don't pay any attention to what is coming out of that permafrost. So here's Brian, who's obviously eager to comment on what you've said. Yeah, Brian.
Yes, well, I want to really mention that the Black Sea has a pivotal role to play in this restoring climate, and that is, we figured out you could grow about a gigaton of macroalgae seaweed on the surface of the Black Sea, and the portion that sinks into the Black Sea, it's an anoxic ocean. It's the biggest anoxic ocean on ocean planet Earth, and that's where you can store the carbon, not for centuries, but for thousands of years. Bob Ballard has actually gone down with a submarine with a remote vehicle and found the wooden hulls of ships that sank 2,400 years ago and is still sitting at the bottom of the Black Sea because it's anoxic there. So growing algae with all those extra nutrients going down the Danube, as Paul, was alluding to, that's going to be a huge thing to draw down nutrients, restore the sardines that exist in the Black Sea but are being over-harvested, and we're diminishing their food supply as well. Imagine a gigaton in the Black Sea alone. And so I think enlisting Ukraine and Russia.
Hold on. The Black Sea is emitting sulfur hydrogen sulfide. You want to get poisoned?
Well, no, look, the Black Sea has been naturally anoxic for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so it is a natural phenomenon. And the point is that carbon that is sunk into the Black Sea remains unoxidized for centuries. So it represents one of three major anoxic basins where you can, in fact, sink more carbon and get back into balance. But you need to recognize that the Black Sea is a naturally anoxic basin.
Yeah, but I have heard that the Black Sea, as certain places along the coast of the Black Sea, it's dangerous to be there because it's going to poison you with swamp gas. You just walk along the shore and you get poisoned.
Well, we can review that.
This has been a major political controversy around the Black Sea. Many of the nations around the Black Sea have called for international efforts to stop the clouds of poison, which do sometimes come up from the ocean. And they were really making a big deal of trying to stop the clouds of poison. But then there are these places like the KGB, who have these full-time professional propaganda apparatuses who have only one goal. And they said, hey, it sounds bad for Russia to say you might get poisoned. We have to suppress the knowledge. And there are people here who might know something about this propaganda machinery. Yes?
Like
Lexi, can you tell us about this propaganda machine and how much we can trust it?
Well, I don't, maybe I'm just a little bit distorted. I have probably a distorted view, but I don't trust anything that's related to security services. Even now that Pavel Durov was arrested in France, I know the difference between the KGB and the French security services, but I have that distrust in my DNA, distrust of security, of special services.
All of them.
Also, there's
it's in my DNA probably.
No, actually, there are problems with security services all over the world. That's a valid point. Although you have to admit that the propaganda machinery in Russia is unusually full-time and professional.
Oh, that stands no comparison, of course. By far.
Look, like you're escaping the topic that I'm trying to confront Brian with. And that, you know, here we have propagandists saying the melting permafrost is good for Russia because you can grow more crops. Never mind that it's going to poison the world. And Brian is also chiming in saying it's a good thing that we have the Black Sea because we could dump even more stuff in there, which I say would produce even more hydrogen sulfide and poison even more people. So Brian and I are really about to go toe to toe, except that Peter Wadhams had something to say, which I should let him in on.
Yeah, I'd like to say that all of this, the classic case and the model for this phenomenon are lakes. Certain lakes in Africa have actually produced the kind of sort of mega deaths of all the people living on the side of the lake have died because of the fact that the lake
is there reason to worry about putting more nutrients into the Black Sea? As
We're
Brian
not putting
wants
more
to
nutrients into the Black Sea. I do not propose putting more nutrients into the Black Sea whatsoever. I'm proposing drawing down the nutrients in the surface ocean that Paul Werbos has so aptly described as a major problem in our deltas and our coastal regions. The seaweed draws down those nutrients, and then it provides healthy photosynthesis that increases the oxygen level in the surface ocean and the atmosphere. It's the second lung of our planet. And so maintaining photosynthesis and primary production is absolutely essential, especially in regions where it's been lost. And then furthermore, if we are sinking more carbohydrates into the Black Sea, for example, and it's partly a matter of, again, restoring the level of photosynthesis that existed pre-industrially before warming. It's the question. Sulfur is ubiquitous in the ocean. It's a matter of their oxygenation state, and it's not clear to me, and it's something we should look into more, is understanding the variability of sulfur events in the Black Sea and to what extent they're affecting both historic populations and prehistorically. So that's to be determined. But my sense of it is that we've got to maintain our circulation, as we've talked about, and more importantly, and globally, ensuring that we've got enough primary production on this planet that we can keep both our terrestrial lungs and our marine lungs working nicely to produce oxygen and maintain a healthy system. So we will see about the Black Sea and restoring production there. But I know it's clear for the other 99% of the ocean.
All right. So unless one of you has something more to say, Alexei, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on the topic of the Black Sea again. I don't know how
Yes.
this relates to the topics that we've discussed, but there's a strange thing I read this summer, especially in August, I guess. There's a strange phenomenon for the Black Sea. People who go to the Russian coast of the Black Sea, which is the northeast of the Black Sea. It's not a long stripe, but still it's like between Sochi and the Crimea. And what's interesting is that on the shore there is lots of algae. Basically, all the beaches are green of algae this year. I've never heard about that. I've never thought it could be possible, because a couple of years ago I read something similar about the Black Sea in Poland. About the Baltic Sea, pardon. The Baltic Sea started to get covered with the green algae a couple of years ago when the summer was especially warm, and the Baltic Sea. So it's really not the salinity is negligible because lots of rivers flow into the Baltic Sea, but the Black Sea is white saline. So I was, and let's add to that the sediment that's in there, and I was very much surprised that anything like that would happen. So I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe there's enough algae already.
No, I think the situation there is we're dealing with too many nutrients. And so whenever you've got too many nutrients up near the surface, just as Paul Werbos was talking about, some coming from the Danube River, but also the other rivers as well. If there are too many nutrients, and of course the war could actually affect the amount of nutrients that are in the surface waters, then if there's an excess of nutrients, you will get the green algae, no matter what. And so our challenge and opportunity is to actually cultivate the algae that will enable harvest and draw down the nutrient levels, so you don't see the algae on the beaches. It's offshore, it's growing seaweed, and then it's used for food, feed, and fertilizer in other places. So I think there's an opportunity for us is to draw down those nutrient levels in the surface waters and get back to a healthy level. So that's a great point, Alex.
So it's just a matter of using the stuff and not letting it go to waste, right? What about those large masses of sargassum in the Atlantic? I don't know whether that's still a problem, but 6 or 8 months ago I was reading about huge masses of that kind of seaweed, which washes up on beaches and rots and really awful. Why can't they capture that stuff and make it into, I don't know, biochar or something?
Yeah, we actually started a company on that called Carbon Wave half a decade ago. That was part of our Climate Foundation startup studio to use that sargassum. Of course, it's coming from the denuding of the Amazon and the Orinoco rivers. And so that puts huge amounts, gigatons of nutrients into the Atlantic, and it causes a manageable Sargasso Sea problem to become untenable. I mean, we're looking at 10 to 20 megatons every year of sargassum, and they are working to use that. And so there's some companies like Carbon Wave that are doing that today, and they're working to produce biostimulants and leather and 1 or 2 other products from the sargassum. I've even heard that in Mexico, the goats can be fed a 25% diet of sargassum, and they manage to do pretty well. So it's useful as a feed supplement as well.
It's not the kind of seaweed, though, that does stuff to minimize the burping of methane from cattle, right? Well, you can't use it for that.
No.
That's different. No. But,
It's
you
not
know,
so effective for that. The red seaweeds that we're using in the Pacific Ocean do reduce methane in cattle, and actually there are multiple species that can do that. So that's a good start. I think in the future we'll probably be transitioning from cattle to other approaches, and the food security there is very promising. Actually, I would recommend the work of Tony Seba, who's produced several YouTubes on a hopeful future when it comes to energy, transportation, food, and labor. And so he really talks about the transitions. And his talk, I took his course at Stanford years ago, and of course he's about disruptions and huge transitions that take place. And the next few are going to be in energy, transportation, electric transportation, and food. So I'm hopeful about the future there. And fundamentally, I think
sorry,
TV can be
I
into
give
things.
his name again because
I found it already.
Tony Seba, S-E-B-A.
Yes.
SEBA. Okay, I'll check him out. Good, thank you.
Wonderful.
Go on.
Yeah, and so I think there is actually a very hopeful future, and this is Tony talks about how with the International Energy Agency has determined that solar photovoltaics are the cheapest electricity in history, and that was at 25 cents a watt. Today, China is selling solar PV at 10 cents a watt. It's 2.5 times cheaper it was than when the IEA came out and said it's the cheapest energy in history. And so between that and batteries, which are coming down in price, we can actually, Tony talks about how we can do 100% solar and energy storage and batteries. And that
Tell me
is
about the batteries, because that's a whole different topic. But I want to know, because I'm not impressed with the amount of battery storage that you can buy for anything nowadays, whether it's your cell phone or anything else.
Yeah, it's been a real gap. It's been a real gap, and I've served on the board of Bright Energy Storage Company since 2010 in Colorado. So we've studied grid scale power quite in detail. But the good news is that we're moving from lithium ion batteries, which are okay, to lithium iron phosphate batteries, which are about half the price of lithium ion batteries. And now they've come out, CATL and others have come out with sodium ion batteries, which are twice as affordable as lithium iron phosphate. So we've seen decimation and decimation, factors of 2 cost reductions. And so this is where it's going to go, is with PV, solar PV. That's why we do marine solar for our buoys, is it's the cheapest electricity in history. And we're using the lithium iron phosphate batteries. And soon we're going to use.
My assistant is not here today because he's going to his cottage, and he has to stop at least once, if not twice, to recharge his car to get to his cottage. Now, I'm sorry, but I mean, he doesn't mind that, but I think that's a real problem. When will your sodium batteries enable my assistant to get to his cottage with one trip? Stop.
I think the range is going from 500 kilometers to 1,000 kilometers in the coming years. You can buy vehicles already that have this higher range, and so that is a problem that can be solved. So I think that part of it's manageable. That's on the energy side. Going to transportation, and that is electric vehicles, which will work well, and we need to accelerate that transition. And thank heavens, you can buy an electric vehicle now in China for $4,000. So the prices are coming down. It's a small commuting vehicle, but I'm impressed. And I'll tell you, I have 2 electric bicycles and no cars. And it's any money I put into electric bicycles, it's saving money when it comes to reducing the carbon associated with the cars. So to the extent we can, I'm going to quote Amory Lovins when he says, "Ship the electrons and leave the heavy nuclei at home." And that's us. So we're a global citizen staying in one place. Go on, Peter.
Well, it's just to say, a topic for a future talk here might be, why on earth are we bothering with hydrogen? Because we are, and it's a madness, because it's not energy efficient, and it's extremely dangerous. So I simply don't know, and
I should be with you in that program if it happens, because that was my job at NSF and DOE, and we could get very deep into these subjects.
Well, I have.
I don't know where to begin because I see so much stuff in the press and in policy, which is radically different from what we really know on the real technology front, from NSF and IEEE especially. We know things
It's
about
just that I have
batteries
a-
and electric cars that are just totally different from what people are being told. It turns out the very best battery possibility for cars is a lithium air battery, which was tested at Argonne something like 10 years ago, has 10 times the energy density efficiency of the new alternatives people talk about as new. But the problem is the real breakthrough came from an Afro-American inventor in Georgia. He passed peer review. The people around Harris and Clyburn in the House really say they're pushing what Afro-Americans can do to contribute to these problems, but they're putting politics first. And right now, I'm at the point where we have this technology. Even if Harris is elected, I don't see the path to getting it used. And lately, I'm just hoping some other countries will get on the game, because since the US is wasting its investment, it creates opportunities for other countries. But it's not just electric cars, because with algae, you can make alternate liquid fuels. And when I was working for Senator Specter, I said, we need a balanced market-based approach that lets the consumer decide between alternate liquid fuels and electricity. Develop both options, and in the end, let the market decide.
I agree with you, Paul. And in fact, I believe it's the Department of Energy, PNNL, that actually developed a process for turning seaweed into biocrude, and that is the hydrothermal liquefaction process. That's been brought forward to the point where we developed an entire ARPA-E Mariner program for actually bringing the cost of seaweed down beyond the food price, beyond the feed price, beyond the fertilizer price, to the point where bioplastics and biocrude become practical. So we see that as a continuation. Bill was talking.
If we could get Barbara Boxer to talk to Kamala Harris, maybe there'd be some hope by that route. But there are other people in the West.
Well,
people I know who are hoping for Vance to solve these problems.
I'd still like to mention this this madness of hydrogen, because it's sort of caught hold of people.
Yeah, it's a mass hysteria, absolutely.
And I'm got familiar with it because I work with a company that does sometimes does racing. They do electric car racing called Extreme E, and so they're very enlightened. It's very nice to see electric cars being used for racing. And then there's a side issue which I've been working on with them on energy sources. And then suddenly, for no apparent reason, the company decided that they were going to switch to hydrogen, so that there was you're going to have extreme hydrogen, not extreme extreme electric. And suddenly, why are they doing this? And well, in fact, I just discovered that the company has just decided to go bust. So I think that's probably connected with their choice of having huge tanks of hydrogen, which are trying to do a retake of the of airship design. And I couldn't see why. There's no energy reason for it. No practical reason that I can see. So I'm baffled by.
Now, to be honest, I have recently learned from France 24 that there is some geological hydrogen which might have some market. Mm-hmm. And an honest market-based approach would emphasize alternate liquid fuels and electricity, but there should be fair rules so that if you can get geological hydrogen to help, the rules should make it possible to sell it. However, right now, what I've seen of hydrogen in the United States, the money is mostly based on something like fraudulent politics. and I've seen it very close up.
You know, I don't know whether Peter Wadhams has talked to Barbara Lolar on this, but Peter introduced me to Barbara Sherwood Lolar, who is a professor at University of Toronto, and I might have met her in some other way, but I never had. And she is somebody who is, I've been trying for months to get her on a forum, and she has family issues that get in the way. But the main thing is that when she does talk, what she says she wants to talk about is natural hydrogen. She is a geologist, and she found the oldest water on the planet. I saw her holding a jar of it, but she is now trying to find natural seams of hydrogen in the soil, which I want to talk to her about. What will she do with it when she gets it? Is this going to be something she's going to use to power these racing cars that Peter is deploring, or what's the game plan? Is there a real market for hydrogen from such natural sources?
Build airships. They're always talking about large containers of hydrogen, which are putting. They like to talk about big earth-moving vehicles and so on, and these things have got these huge hydrogen tanks strapped onto them, and presumably the assumption is it won't all explode on you, although I feel that it quite likely would. But it's still wasteful, extremely wasteful in terms of the percentage of the energy that's useful.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. Peter's
And I
right.
should have been too favorable. Scientists have to be careful not to be unduly negative of other approaches. And that's why I think it was good that Senator Specter wanted to draft a law that would be fair to the hydrogen people if they met certain standards. But I was very skeptical they ever would. On the other hand, alternate liquids and electricity, we know damn well we can make either one of them work well enough so that we should let the consumer decide which is better.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, I agree completely. Peter and Paul are right. You know, the batteries are 90% efficient in storing power, whereas the hydrogen cycle is about 27% efficient. And so a result is you're losing about 3/4 of that energy. And that's a profound difference. Maybe there's a time and a place for remote fuels and whatnot, but we've actually seen that, there's plenty of alternatives, and it could be that green methane or ammonia is a much better fuel, if you will, if we're going to have to go there with the green fuels than using hydrogen. So there's plenty.
You're promoting ammonia. I know a guy who has an ammonia-based car, which he drove across Canada. And everybody that I've mentioned this to who knows anything goes shrieking away saying, damn lucky he didn't blow it up. Ammonia is very explosive, isn't it? Wouldn't it be worse than
and poisonous? And poisonous, yes. Now, it turns out the very best book that was done a few years ago on fuel cells for cars, I should remember the name. I have a problem with aging. The name was right at the tip of my tongue. It's deep in my folders. It was the #1 technical book on how to build fuel cells for a fuel cell car. And that guy used not only methanol, but also ammonia. But the safety problems with ammonia are indeed very serious. You don't want to have any risk that your car kills everybody within a city block. I mean, that's rather serious. And you don't need to use ammonia because methanol will do anything that ammonia will do, basically. You don't need ammonia.
Yeah. Methanol and maybe LNG in some applications, liquefied natural gas. Both of those green sources of methane can be suitable alternatives and can store plenty of hydrogen molecules or hydrogen atoms.
Mm-hmm.
So that part works fine. The third area that Tony Seba talked about was food security. And actually what he highlighted is something that's also highlighted in George Monbiot's book, Regenesis. And it's about using solar power to actually power precision fermentation and produce a lot of the protein that we're going to need from algae. and just like you make beer in a beer vat, you're going to make protein in a protein vat with a similar way using solar power. And that's really interesting.
I've got my name on the mailing list of something called Solein, Solein, which is a company in, I think, Denmark that is doing that. And
Good.
I wanted they send pictures of their food that they've cooked in various wonderful recipes. They had a big party in Singapore recently, I believe, where they had a chef produce the whole dinner, included, from the appetizers to the dessert. Everything had Solein in it, and it was all apparently very delicious, and it certainly, the pictures look great. But
yeah,
I want to know when they are about to go public with that, because I really want to taste it. Do you know anything about that, Brian?
You can buy these things today. In 2020, the cost of protein was $100 per kilo using this method. In 2025, it'll be approximately $10 per kilo. And in 2030, it'll be $1 per kilo. Now, what's significant about that evolution is when it hits $10 per kilo, you can produce casein and whey, which are the essential proteins in milk. That's about 3% protein. And it actually, within the next 5 years, this process will displace milk for most dairy products. And you'll have a combination of vegetarian milks that, are going to be pretty darn good. And they're going to use this, precision fermentation approach to actually displace most of the milk market. Now, there'll be specialty milks and, dairy milk, cow milk for some things. But the point is, it'll take 50 times less farmland to do that. And then at $1 per kilo, meat replacement becomes practical. And I've been enjoying my veggie burgers recently that are, veggie based, but that protein will come again from precision fermentation. What it means is we're going to use about 50 times less farmland to feed the world. And we're going to be able to rewild half of that farmland into productive forests in the future. So it's actually a very hopeful view for rewilding our planet. And I think that'll be great. We just need to prepare for these transitions and understand how there is a bountiful future ahead of us. And it's a matter of riding these waves, if you will. And then this one he mentions is that, in our dotage, in our older age, healthcare is very important, and taking care of the elderly is very important. Well, the robots that are coming out now are going to cost less than $10 an hour in the next 5 or 10 years. There's already several $20,000 robots, and it's quite likely that in our elder years, we'll be taken care of with healthcare from those robots that are coming online. They're talking about 1 billion robots down the road.
I have already PSWs who come in and are sent by the government to take care of me because I have mobility issues. Now, are you telling me that one of these robots is going to come and empty my garbage and pick up the mail? And really? And they're going to make my bed? Will they help
take
me
a look
with the power?
Take a look at the Optimus robots that Elon Musk is using in his factories. He's going to have several thousand next year, and they're building several thousand robots over at Figure AI, and I think that's now supported by NVIDIA and by OpenAI. And I just saw YouTube on that yesterday, an interview between my friend Peter Diamandis and the CEO of Figure, and he's actually designing and building those robots now. I recommend that YouTube. I'll see if I can find it for you. And it's really talking about the future of labor, where we're going to have plenty of affordable labor to take care of our elderly and take care of the routine jobs that we need to do. And I'm expecting them to be very, very helpful and polite and cooperative. And so that's a very hopeful future for our elder years. And I think it will give us a lot more resources to help produce a peaceful and free world that is sustainable.
Well, I'm looking for it right now. If they can bring somebody in to put the groceries away, because when I have the groceries delivered, they sit there for a day or two unless somebody comes and puts them away for me. we've got only about 5 minutes left, and Alexei has his hand up, and then I have not acknowledged Charles David Tauber.
Okay, I will just
You've
go
been
over.
sitting here forever. Alexei, speak, and then let's give Charles the floor for the last word, okay?
Just two brief words of inspiration. We mentioned cultured meat. We mentioned technologies that would reduce the price of proteins, that would reduce the area of agricultural lands needed for pastures. But I think just that's all very beautiful. But for me, it's one factor is that's very important here in this respect is that there will be a lot less animal cruelty, a lot less suffering, which is unfortunately very typical, very characteristic of the food industry nowadays. And I think that this is very inspiring, and I can't wait to see that day come.
Okay, thank
Really,
you.
I'm very inspired by that.
Yes.
Made my day. Thank you.
Great. I do want to give Charles David Tauber the floor because I haven't even said hello to you. Come on. How are you?
What can I say? Things are not going well.
No.
We're suffering in terms of money. We don't have enough money. I don't know how long we'll be able to survive. I'm in touch
As
with
an organization, not as a body.
Well, as a body as well, because I'm dependent on the organization. But there are suicide epidemics, and we don't have, I mean, I can't go through this in 1 minute. It's just a bit too much.
Mhm. Suicide epidemics in Croatia, where you are?
Sorry?
You
And
said
in
that
Africa,
there's-
and in Africa. I got
in
a,
Africa. Mhm.
in Nigeria, certainly in Malawi, we're working with some people there. And we're, as Alexei knows, we're working with some Russian deserters. So the whole psychological thing is a big topic.
Mhm.
And I don't want to take just 1 minute to talk about it because,
Mhm. I get it. Well, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
no, it was a good discussion and
Mhm.
it's been worth listening to. But if we're going to talk about things,
Yeah, I noticed one thing is that my interest so much focus on climate that where I used to be 90% of my conversations were about conflicts, wars, and weapons, and the development of new horrible instruments of death. I'm not focusing on that as much, and that even shows up in today's global town hall, where maybe I'm delighted that we've had the conversation about these climate issues, but I'm aware that there's so much more to be said also about some of the other threats, everything from AI, which Paul Werbos is concerned about mostly and has such a big history in, to certainly the development of nuclear weapons, and that continue to be a real threat. So I don't want to lose the balance completely. We do have other threats with us that need to be continue to be addressed, including things that Bill and Marilyn work with, just plain how to keep our wildlife from perishing in the wilderness. So I don't know. How is that going, by the way? Bill, is there any progress on sustaining or putting down this epidemic of canine distemper?
Canine distemper?
Mhm.
No, there's nothing really new there. But California has finally got itself in gear to build statewide, build wildlife overcrossings, culvert undercrossings, and things like that from, here in California, from the northern border by Oregon all the way to Mexico. And it's the first time that California has really put into gear and put the money behind doing these projects. And there are great organizations out there that are doing it right now. And I'm doing a small chunk of that with a wildlife overcrossing down in the south end of San Jose. And that's primarily to get Tule elk from one mountain range into another mountain range so that the gene pool is enhanced and made much, much more healthy than it is.
You say elk?
Elk, yes.
I didn't know you even had elk in California.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're all over.
All right. Good. Well, our time is up, friends. This has been such an interesting conversation. At least I have found it fascinating. And I hope that other people will want to listen to it. So if you want to share it, please do. We, of course, also have a course that I put together on Udemy called Become a Climate Change Influencer. So if any of you want to take up an investigation of ways in which you can become very effective in your community or elsewhere in stimulating other people to learn about the various forms of technologies for mitigating global warming, you can take that course for free. It's absolutely for free, and it takes you anything from 2 hours to 15 hours, depending on how much time you want to spend on doing the homework that I recommend. But it's all about the particular type of geoengineering, if you will, that we focus on in that course is the use of soil amendments that sequester carbon. So Brian will be happy to know that we talk about the use of seaweed as a soil amendment and biochar, and particularly rock dust, enhanced rock dust, which is created by smashing up rocks and making them into powder, which makes a very fine way of capturing carbon in the atmosphere and sequestering it in the soil to the benefit of the people who eat the products that are produced there. So if you have some free time and want to waste a few minutes checking it out, go to Udemy and look for the course called Become a Climate Change Influencer. I'll see you all in a month, the last Sunday of September. Thank you very much.
Will the link be the same?
The link is always the same. Yeah,
The link is always the same.
always the
Okay.
same. Just put it aside and you can use it. Always the
That's
last
what it
Sunday in
is.
every month. Unless it's Christmas. If it's Christmas or New Year's, we skip it. Otherwise, we'll see you then. All right.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. So.
Thank you all. Take care.
Project Save the World produces these forums, and this is episode 625. Watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues, and we welcome your comments too. To find a particular talk show, check the scroll list on the homepage or use the search bar. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine, which now serves as a free of charge newsletter to help mobilize knowledge about 6 global threats to humankind. We currently email the magazine as a PDF or link to any interested organization in the world that works to prevent a global catastrophe involving war and weapons, global warming, famine, pandemics, radioactive contamination, or cyber risks. Just email us at office@peacemagazine.org and we'll add your group's email address without charge to our list. For individual subscriptions at $20 Canadian per year, go to pressreader.com on your browser and search for Peace Magazine.